Good morning, students. So today we're going to take a look at the lab portion of Chapter 2. So I've selected 3 exercises that I'm going to go through with you and give you an idea of how to do these. So I'll be using the idle. I am going to go step by step so that there should be no problem with how you would do these problems. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is set up my code. So the easiest way to do this, I have found, is to just do a right click, and you can just go to New and just click a text document. And right here, for example, I could say that I want to add, let's see, what exercise are we going to do? Exercise 2.4. Okay, so let's say we're going to do exercise, and this is where you might use that underscore, 2.4. And all you need to do is change the extension to .py, and if you have Python installed, yes, this will turn into a Python file. Now all you need to do is to do a right click, and where it says edit with idle, that's what you want to do. In my case it's 3.864, but yours might be different. And that'll open up the idle so that we can now work on our little setup. So I'll go ahead and maximize this. I'll get rid of this. And now we're ready to actually work. So one moment. Let me get this here. Okay, so now that we have our idle set up, we can just say, we can do our usual setup here and just say our name. Probably, you know what, I'm going to just go ahead and write this stuff up and then I'll be right. Okay, so what I went ahead and did is I went ahead and wrote all my header comments. So my name, the class, the exercise, the date, and then usually you're going to want to write something about what this thing is or what it does. So that's what I did here. Now, the first thing we need to do is we're going to have 5 items, and so I'm just going to go ahead and type in item. You can use whatever you want. You could say item 1, item 2. I prefer _1, and I'm not sure if the book tells you that you have to use like item 1. I don't know. I'm going to use _1 because that just makes sense to me versus just item 1. It's clear that that's a number afterwards, something that catches your eye. Okay, and then these will be implicitly set to 0 to a double, so we don't need to wonder about that. And I usually would just copy these like this and then just paste them. So we're going to have 5, so that's 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then all I need to do is change the numbers. And there we go. Okay, so we have these new variables that have been declared and initialized. We also need subtotal. I don't know, you could put these together. You don't need a space, but I just think that there should be one. Total, and we're going to say 0.0, and tax is going to equal 0.0, and total also, man, I cannot type today, 0.0. Okay, and we are going to have one constant. And the constant is going to be what? The tax rate. So I'm just going to do it this way. Tax rate is equal to, you can say 0.07 if you want to, but that's fine. Okay, so we have our constant, and now we're going to get the price of each item. So what we're going to do here is write 5 lines of code. So I'm going to write the first one, and then I'll explain it. Okay, so what I did here is I wrote, and this better match up, I wrote item _1, so the variable that we declared and initialized up here, I'm going to use it now down here, and I'm going to say, I'm going to assign it the value. Now remember, this stuff reads from right to left, so here's what's really happening, is we're going to take the input, we're going to prompt the user for a value. And we say, okay, user enter something, so we're passing it this string. Everything between the quotations is a string that's being passed to the console. Then we're going to take that input, and remember in Python everything is passed as brought in as a string. So when the user enters a number, it's going to be a string, but we need to parse it or cast it to a float because it's going to have two places. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to, right here, we're going to, once user enters that value, it's going to be cast to a float. And that's what happens here between this parentheses and this one here. And then we're going to take that, whatever that is, the whole float of all of this. So the user inputs a number. We take that number, we cast it to a float, and that float is now assigned to the variable item underscore 1. And so that's what's happening here. So next, we need 4 more of these. So I'll write those and be right back. Okay, so now we have the 5 items, and the 2 through 5 are just repeats of number 1, just asking for the next values. And I'm going to just format this a little bit better. You don't have to do this part. I just like doing it because I like my stuff to be presented nicely. Okay, so here we go. And all right. Another thing I'll sometimes do is I'll make a note to myself just to say, okay, here's what's happening is at this point we're going to take our user inputs. Of course, this is our variables. I'm not going to comment that because that's obviously what's happening there. And then down here, I'll usually do something like this and say calculations. And then we need to do our actual calculations. So I'll do subtotal first. And that's just going to equal item 1 and excuse me, underscore 1 plus it's going to be the sum of these. So I'm going to do this real quick and then show you what. All right. So what I did here is I just wrote the calculations, and these should be fairly simple. The subtotal is just the sum of the items that were pulled in here, and then the tax is simply the subtotal multiplied by the tax rate, and then of course the total is nothing more than the subtotal plus the tax. And that's it. So the tax is calculated here, it's now going here. So you do need to be able to follow the logic. You know, the subtotal is a sum, the tax is, we're now taking that subtotal that was calculated here, and we're going to multiply it by the tax rate. And now the total is equal to the subtotal that was calculated up here, plus the tax, which was calculated right here on this line. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do some prints. We need to print our outtake. So a lot of times in my code, just to keep things simple, is I'll go ahead and what I'll do is I'll comment this part too and just say print, I don't know, values, I guess. And then, so I'll do this and then I'll explain. Okay, so this is the code that I added here. And what I did was I said we're going to print. And in Python, print means to output to the console. So we're going to print, and we're going to print this string. Remember, the quotations means there's a string. So this is going to be taken literally as a string. We're going to print this, and then comma, we're going to print something else. And what's going to come next is the subtotal. But we don't just want to present the subtotal in the way that it might be calculated. We want to format it. And so we're going to use the format reserved keyword, and we're going to say format this subtotal. How? We're going to use the .2f, which means it's going to be a float, and it's going to have 2 decimal places. So we're going to format this with 2 decimal places as a float. And that's what these mean right here. We're going to do that for all 3 of these: the subtotal, the tax, and the total. And that's it. So the next line is the same thing except for it's being done with sales tax. The third line is the same thing except for it's being done with total. So total, and then format the total that was calculated here in this format, 2 decimal places as a float. Okay, so this should be ready to go. I haven't run this, so you can just hit F5 and this should run. Let's see what happens, and always say yes. And so I get this nice little screen here, and I don't know, we'll just say 10. And the price here is 15, and this will take decimals, so let's go ahead and throw some decimals in there. 5.5, let's say 5.5 of this. And item 5 will say 70.7. And there you go. Subtotal was 126.48. Sales tax is $8.85. So if we put this off to the side, let's just throw it back here. you can see, let's see, it all looks good. I mean, I haven't done the math to double check this stuff, but I'll let you guys do that and let me know if it's wrong. In any case, this is how you'd write this code. So the purpose of this assignment was to declare some variables, and they're going to be implicitly doubles, and then to use a constant, which is done right here, the constant tax rate. And in Python, the way we know it's a constant is we went ahead and we gave it the value. Those of you that are coming from other programming languages like C++ or C#, this part right here, we would have to actually prefix it with constant. But in Python, by just giving it the value, then it's saying, okay, that's the constant. All right, and then I already explained these values. So we have user inputs, take the input, then cast them to a float, and then assign that value to the variable that we declared up here. And then we have our calculations, which are, I think, self-explanatory. And then we print those using the formatting. 2 decimal places to the right, and their floats. And that's it. When it's done, you get something that looks like this. So after this is done, you're going to want to save this, of course. And so you can just click here, and you can save, and then just save it whatever you want. So we had already named it exercise_2_4.py, which is, in my case, it's on my desktop. And then this is the file. If I was to assign something like this to you, this is the file that I would want, is the .py file, along with, don't forget, I want a second file, which is a screenshot of this, of the actual result of your input and of your code running. Okay, so that concludes this exercise. I'm going to do another exercise, and we'll see if we can have a little bit more fun. So this time I'm going to do programming exercise 2-7. We're going to use the same series of steps. We're going to go to the text file. We're going to go ahead and call it exercise, I guess, _2_7. And remember to change this extension to PY. Yep. And now just right click, open it with the idle. And we have our idle come right up. Let's get this here. Excellent. Okay, so I'll go ahead and write the header information. Okay, I went ahead and wrote my comments, and now we're going to go ahead and do our variables. For this one, it's going to be miles, and we'll go ahead and do the implicit thing and say 0.0 and gallons also equal to 0.0 and mpg also equal to 0.0, and then let's go ahead and do the formatting as long as we're at it. Alright, so next thing is we need to get some information from the users, and so there's two that we need to get. We need to get miles and we need to get gallons. So we're going to use the same concept I did in the last one, where we need to ask the user, pass them the string saying enter the miles, enter the gallons, and then take that input, cast it to a float, then take that float and assign it to these variables up here. So I'm going to go ahead and write that code. All right, so I ask the user, I'm going to pass them an input saying enter the miles and driven. And remember, inside the quote, this is all a string. This is what the user looking at the console is going to see. They're going to enter something, and that we know that because we're using the reserved keyword input. And that applies to both of these. And then we're going to cast that to a float so that we can use it. So it will take decimals. And then we're going to assign whatever the user input and then was casted to a float, we're going to assign those values to miles and to gallons. And that's it. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is write the outputs. The outputs are simply going to be the prints to print out our information. Actually, I need to do the calculation. I did miss that. Okay, so let me do that real quick. Okay, so I added this line here, and I can't spell today, calculate. So I did my calculations, which is just miles per gallon, and it's going to equal miles divided by gallons, thus miles per gallon. Then our output. The output's going to be, we're going to print out, but we're going to take that MPG. So remember, we're working from right to left. We're going to take that MPG that was calculated here. We're going to place it here. We're going to format it. We're going to use the format reserved keyword to 2 decimal places and as a float. And then we're going to apply it right here in this string. So we're creating this string, and the string that we're going to print out from the console, you used, and then the MPG formatted, and then concatenated with miles per gallon. And all this should work. I haven't run it. Let's find out. F5. Yes. Okay, so it says enter miles driven. Let's just say 100 miles. Enter gallons for fuel used. Let's say we used gas guzzler. We used 20 gallons of fuel. Let's say. So we used 2 miles per gallon. So okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so there's your code. And what you're supposed to get out of this exercise was how to declare your variables, and go ahead and tell the system that we're going to be using float in this case. How to get information from the user. Right here, we're asking the user, and then and we can tell we're asking the user because we have this input reserved keyword, and then we're casting it to a float, and then we're assigning all of this to the variables miles and gallons. Then we run our calculations, and then we do our outputs. And that is it. Okay, well that concludes the lab section demo. Hope you enjoyed that. That's all.